This is the Transforming Anxiety podcast with Kelly Hanlon McCormick, and today is episode number 235, Keep the Bridges, Burn the Boats. Welcome to Transforming Anxiety. I'm your host, Kelly McCormick. I'm a mom to 2 boys, a wife, friend, daughter, and sister, and I'm a certified life coach, yoga teacher, and soon-to-be mindfulness meditation teacher. I'm no stranger to anxiety, and I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and your emotions so that you too can transform anxiety into calm, peace, and whatever you want for your life. I'm so glad you're here. Hey there. Welcome in today. Oh, it's good to be with you. It's such a cozy day here. Got candles lit. I'm sipping on tea. I have slippers on my feet. It's good to be talking to you. I really look forward to our chats every week. I love this time with you. The world continues to be a really hard place. Yeah? Lots of news, lots of fear, lots of violence, more war. Headlines you really just almost can't believe. But who would want to make this stuff up, right? In the midst of all that life is, on a collective and an individual basis, I am really, really thankful for this time with you, for these conversations, for this time to pause and take a look, to get aware, to practice a bit with each other, just even through the podcast like this, before we get back to it, right? That we do this together means a lot. Take care of yourself. Life is so damn lifey, and it can be pretty intense, right? So I'm glad you're here today. I'm glad that I get to hang out with you. So, all right, let's get into it. How about our intention for the day? This is actually kind of a meta intention because my intention with this one is about being intentional. It's about being deliberate. It's about being purposeful with our words, our relationships, our actions, with what we want and what we need and what we dream about. And it's about moving through the world in a way that feels intentional. Not just thinking it or not just saying it, but that really feels intentional. Sometimes we get lost in the weeds, right? We start to lose track of the bigger picture, what's really important to us, what we really prioritize and value and hold dear. And listen, sure, we're just trying to get the dog's paws clean. We're trying to get dinner on the table. We're trying to get algebra or geometry homework done, whatever math it is now. Yes. And we lose sight. So my intention for this conversation is to practice and cultivate being more intentional. And we're going to do this by talking about keeping the bridges and burning the boats. Okay? All right, here we go. So let's start with the bridges. You've all heard the phrase about don't burn your bridges, right? Like if you leave a job, if you're moving on from some position or some role, if you're changing something in your life, and there's the sense that you're leaving one thing and you're moving on to another thing, then you often hear, people will often advise you, don't burn your bridges, right? And the idea, of course, is that you leave on a good note, that you are generous, that you are grateful, and that you leave in a way that if you ever wanted or needed to come back, right? If you ever wanted or needed to reconnect, if you ever wanted or needed to rely on those people or those connections, you'd be welcome, right? It's like the opposite of that scene. Do you remember in Office Space when Jennifer Aniston totally loses it with her manager? You remember that? About the pieces of flair? And she just flips him off and she lets him have it, right? She quits that job just guns blazing. And listen, it's satisfying to watch for sure. And we have all had daydreams about that or had jobs where we wish we could have just burned it down on the way out. But this is perhaps a sound and solid piece of advice, right? Don't burn your bridges. You never know where life will lead, or who knows who, or how this situation and experience and relationship could maybe come back around at some future point in your life. We never know, right? The world is small sometimes, and things change, and then they change again. And sometimes going back to our roots, our homes, our original places or experiences, sometimes returning to those relationships and connections. Sometimes that's just the thing. And if you've burned your bridges, no can do, right? All right. Now let's talk about boats. And then we're going to consider all of this together and why the heck I thought this was worth having a conversation about. All right. Okay. Have you heard the phrase burn the boats? I don't think this one is maybe as common as the not burning your bridges one. So the story goes that back in the 1500s, there was a Spanish conquistador, Cortez, who arrived on the shores of Veracruz with a small army to take a special treasure from the Aztec Empire. And when they got there, he had his men turn back and burn the boats they'd arrived in. And he announced to them that they would either be successful in their mission and they would take the treasure and they would be returning home in the Aztecs' boats, or they would die, right? He was giving them the option of success or death. Their plan B, right, escaping by hopping back in their own boats, was no longer available to them. So this was a way of seriously committing to the task at hand. There was literally no other option because their boats were gone. Now what? Well, they were successful, as the story goes. They managed to get the treasure. They conquered the Aztec Empire. So it worked. And I just think this is interesting to consider. What went into this for that army? Like mentally, they had the option of defeating the Aztecs or dying, which isn't really an option, is it? Right? You're going to give everything you've got to succeed at that point because death isn't a plan B. So this tactic, it ups the strategy by a lot. And I think it's useful to consider for us. Now, you hear this story told in business and entrepreneur circles as like inspirational lore. And sure, it is kind of inspirational, particularly from like the safety and comfort of our couches, right? But I wanted to bring these two ideas together today as a way to consider awareness and intention and double down on commitment with kindness and openness. Like, how can you fully give yourself to what's in front of you and maintain relationships and past experiences and keep your future wide open? This is a way of being, as the poet David Whyte would say, a good ancestor to your future self. How can you be present and intentional right now in this moment as a way of caretaking for your future self? Yeah? So, first, I want you to consider a place where you've burned a bridge. Maybe you've burned a few bridges where you went all out, right? Maybe you set fire to everything and walked away, right? We've all done it. Maybe not quite Jennifer Aniston style in Office Space, but there are places where we've sabotaged relationships, where we have done away with networks or connections, where we have kind of gone out in flames, right? Really just let go of things in a way that didn't foster any goodwill or fond feelings in any direction. Now, what about places where you dock the boats, you set off on a new mission, you got a new challenge, a new chapter, a new goal, and you cling for dear life to those boats? Like you keep your plan B and your plan C and your plan D firmly in place, and you think, well, if this doesn't work out, I've got a whole fleet of ships just ready to carry me right back to more familiar shores. I know we've all done this. This is a way of keeping one foot out the door. A way of, get this is a way of protecting yourself. Yeah? Because then if things don't go well, If it's not what you hoped or thought, like if it just plain doesn't work, you can say, well, I didn't really try. I was always thinking I was just going to take the next boat back. No biggie. I wasn't invested. I'm okay without that thing. And even though you wanted it, some part of you wanted it, you know you didn't fully commit and go all in, right? You had those boats waiting and ready. So I'd like to offer a different spin on these and kind of fuse them together, which is why I called this episode Keep the Bridges, Burn the Boats. I think we need both of these ideas when we're doing something new, when we're leaving something old behind, when we're committing ourselves to a change, to a new thing, to a new experience or situation, whatever it is. On the one hand, you'll know whether you're fully committed to something, if you're ready to commit to something, when you can, metaphorically, burn the boats. When you're like, no way back, no plan B, I'm going all in. And this is not nothing. I think we talk about these things as if they're like, oh yeah, like commit, right? It feels all hardcore and fun. I'm in. Like that's all it takes. There's about 1,000 steps between saying that and feeling that, like in your cells. Now, alternatively, you'll know whether you're clinging to those ships, right? Making sure they're all lined up in the harbor. You're keeping them safe. You're keeping them ready to go. It's this thing, like on the surface, we're like, yes, I'm committed. But again, those 1,000 steps to like feel it deep in your bones, that's what you need. Conviction, right? Sureness. And a lot of times we need to feel it deeply before we see any outside evidence that we have any right to believe it. Now, this is kind of wild, right? There's this dance that we do, making sure our boats are nearby and then double checking our conviction. Boats, conviction, boats, conviction, right? There's like this back and forth in our minds. And then eventually one of those wins out. Either we keep the boats nearby and we kind of go halfway in, we're keeping one foot out the door, and then if it doesn't work, we're kind of surprised, honestly, because we knew, we were like, well, I wasn't all in. So if it works, we're like, huh, interesting. If it doesn't work, well, it wasn't meant to be, right? I was right. It was too much. It was too different, too hard, too something. I'll just live a smaller life. No biggie. Right? I like to use this litmus test. Well, I use this for a lot of things. I use this with pretty much all of my students at some point. I ask them, whatever they're doing, whatever they're considering, whatever they're thinking, I ask them, does that feel limiting or does it feel expansive? That's the test. Does this action or thing or thought limit me in some way? Like, do I have to shrink? Do I have to play small? Do I have to give up on something that I want or need in order to think or act this way? Or does it feel expansive? Does it feel like freedom? Does being this way or doing this thing or thinking this way, does it expand my life? Do I show up in a more vast and steady way? It doesn't always have to be bigger or more. Be careful of that, okay? Expansive doesn't always mean more. I think sometimes our dreams and our wants and our desires and our needs are actually kind of sweet. They're kind of ordinary, like things that don't dramatically shake the world off of its axis. So don't use the word expansive against yourself to think it has to be really, really big. It doesn't. All right. But to me, and see how this feels for you, to me, keeping the bridges feels expansive. I'm never limited by keeping bridges, by being kind, by keeping networks and connections and relationships. by opening myself to the idea that there may be a time and a reason to circle back, to go back, to return. Who knows? Like, I've been wrong about so much, right? Maybe I leave for a bit and try something and I do return, but I return with new info, new experiences, new feelings and a fresh perspective and a deeper sense of who I am. There's a difference between keeping the bridges and keeping the boats. You see what I mean? Keeping the bridges is keeping the connections. It's nurturing relationships and cultivating belonging for yourself. This has to be genuine, by the way. You can't fake it. That won't work well in the long run. But authentically, genuinely, for real, maintaining your bridges usually works pretty well. Now, think about this. How does clinging to your boats work? Is that limiting or expansive? So think of a specific example in your life, something you want to change, something you want to commit to, something you want to go all in on. You don't want to look back. And listen, maybe you're not quite there yet. You're pointed in that direction, but you can tell you're still holding on to the old, right? The boats still feel pretty necessary. Because what if? What if you can't find the treasure? What if you don't defeat the Aztecs? I hear you. It's scary. Yeah. And is it limiting or expansive to hold on to the boats? This is a subtle difference. Keeping the bridges, burning the boats. The distinction is in what you're keeping versus what you're burning. Keep the connections, burn the plan B. Keep the people and the relationships, burn the safety net. Like, how about an example? Let's walk through this with an example real quick. I want you to cross-pollinate this into your life, though, your experience, your past or your future or some desired change, right? See how this fits for you. Let's talk through a work example. This is one just from my own life. I worked in the corporate world for 15 years or so before I started doing this full time. And during my corporate career, I changed jobs a few times. So one time I moved back to Kansas City after a few years in Chicago after college. One time I got headhunted away from the consumer electronics industry to work in the meeting and event planning industry. But each time, there was a very real sense of thank you as I left. All the bridges, right? Coworkers, managers, friends. Even though, honestly, in a lot of cases, they were people I realistically knew I would never see again, right? Those bridges, that's important. Like, I didn't have any plans to go back to working at Motorola in Chicago, but it was the connections. It was the people I wanted to keep. Those were the bridges. It wasn't about taking a boat back to what was. It was about the relationships, keeping those. And then I went out on my own, full time with my own business, and burned the boats down. Like, I didn't want an exit strategy. I didn't want a safety net. I didn't want a plan B. My whole family was like, what are we going to do if this doesn't work? I know. I know. My fellow entrepreneurs will understand this. And some of the rest of you may think we're nuts. I totally get it. But really, I burned the boats because for me, it was a mind thing. I needed to know this was the plan. This business, that was it. I wanted to go all in. And as long as I was working, even part-time somewhere else, as long as I had my attention and my time fragmented by another job, I knew I couldn't fully commit to this. Not in the way I wanted and needed in order to make this truly successful, in order to create what I wanted to create for myself, but for you guys. So I kept all those connections, all those relationships, all those bridges from the corporate world, and I burned the hell out of the boats. That was over 5 years ago now. Now, I will say, for the 5 years before that, I didn't burn the boats. So for 5 years, I was doing this part-time, evenings and weekends, some free time, right? I was writing, I was talking with people, I was having calls with students. I was kind of trying to sort it out, right? I was trying it on. And that worked for a while until I was ready to call this what it was, which was a business. It wasn't a hobby anymore. It wasn't this cute side hustle anymore. It became me, and it's who I am. And I had to burn the boats at that point. I had to leave corporate, no more working elsewhere. I had to work fully here. So you see like the subtle but vital difference? Bridges, yes. Boats, no. Keep the connections, keep the people, keep the networks. Keep your sense of village and belonging and interconnectedness. But when you're really ready to make a change, burn the boats. You don't need a way back. You need to commit to a way forward. Those bridges may help you, right? But the boats, you don't need them. And if you do need boats again in the future, be sure the boats you're using are because you've conquered something. Right? A dream, a goal, a change, a slight but powerful shift. And it means you have access to new boats. You got some new boats to continue your journey. Yeah? So keep the bridges, burn the boats. I want to hear how this one lands for you. Reach out to me. Let me know how you're doing. I want to know what you want support with. And hey, be sure, I haven't reminded you of this for a while, be sure that you're on the email list. Visit me at kellyhanlonmccormick.com to sign up. We're going to be having some conversations around communication, around relationships. We're going to be talking more about polyvagal theory. We're going to be digging in with parenting, lots of good stuff. So be sure you're on the list so you don't miss anything. Also, it kind of feels like it's time for another mindfulness class. Yeah? Like those first hints of fall have me really craving some meditative time with you. So look for that too. Sound good? All right. I will see you again at the same time, same place next week for more transforming anxiety. And until then, please take care. Do you have someone to help you with your stress, anxiety, worry, and overwhelm? If not, I would love to be your coach. The Fierce Calm Project is my virtual coaching program where we get to go in on topics like this one, and I can help you apply these lessons to your life so that you're creating your own transformation. We do live coaching calls, guided meditations, on-demand yoga classes. We hold book club where we read books your neighborhood book club won't, and there's lots of bonus content that I've created just for you. When you're ready to take what you're learning on the podcast to a whole other level, then come on over and check out the Fierce Calm Project at kellyhanlonmccormick.com/Fierce Calm Project.